So, hey, my name's Alex Tang. I built or converted that motorcycle in the back. I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk about today. I feel a little, let's just say, scared because the king of electric motorcycles is sitting here with us, Richard, who just set a land speed record at Bonneville of 218 miles an hour. Right? 218? Which actually is pretty ridiculous. All right, so, hey, Jamie, were you going to do the slides? Oh, yeah, I'll do the slides. Thanks, man. So there's actually not much to the slides. Mainly just some talking points for me. I'm going to try and keep this pretty quick because I know everybody wants to get out on the tour. So, okay. So first off, why a motorcycle or why convert an electric motorcycle? Originally, for me, the history goes back to missing the EV1 by about 9 months and going, hey, can I get one? And they're saying, no, they actually just crushed them all. And I went, oh, damn. So I waited for the next batch, and it didn't happen for a long time. So I got started talking with somebody about electric scooters one day, and she told me that she had one, went 20 miles an hour, great for going to the store and things like that. So I picked one up. It was cool. It was a little Zappino. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It looks like a little Vespa. Goes about 40 miles an hour. Not very powerful. Unfortunately, I think in the valley, even what's that?
They're pretty heavy.
Yeah, very heavy, and so am I. So those two combinations made it. There's going to be a weight theme with my talk, which you'll hear in a little bit.
500 pounds there.
Yeah, right. So the Zappino was good. I think driving around the valley, trying to get to and from work. I actually only live a few miles away from work, so it's pretty easy. It just 40 miles an hour tends to make you feel like you're fast enough to be on the road and slow enough where people are going to run you over. So I figured, okay, well, maybe I'll try and buy a motorcycle, a faster one, a motorcycle. So at the time, this is about just about 2 years ago, there were a couple of motorcycle manufacturers out there. And I'll talk about those in a minute. Let me see what I got next going on here. And I was looking, and when I was looking around for that's not what I wanted up there. All right, woohoo! Next one. So cool. Yeah. So basically, at that point, it was figure out should I buy one, and originally I was going to buy one, and at the time there were. There was the Zero. They only had the Zero MX, and they had just released the S, which is their street motorcycle. It had a top speed of 60 miles an hour, has a 4.5 or 5 kilowatt hour pack or something like that. So it can do about 20 to 30 mile range or something like that. And it was about 10 grand at the time. I think it was about 10. There was the Bramo Inertia, which had just been released. They hadn't actually shipped any yet. And then there was a smaller company out of Oakland called Electric Motorsport, which had a GPRS, which was their own sort of, they would buy I forget what the frame was at this point. And then they sort of a pseudo custom build. Again, they were all in about the $10,000 range. They all had top speeds about 60 miles an hour. And they all had about 20 to 40 miles worth of range. So I was thinking, when I was researching it, I found a website, elmoto.net, which sort of become the place for me to find out all about all electric motorcycle things. And at that time, there were a bunch of people doing conversions. And it's kind of one of those things, if you hang around a bunch of people who are doing something, it doesn't seem so ridiculous after a while. So I'm a triathlete, too, so I started with small things. And then after a while, people were like, oh, you can do an Ironman, it's fine, no big deal. So I did one. That wasn't a great idea, but in any case, you can sort of see how those things progress, right? So I was hanging out and talking with a lot of people who were doing electric motorcycle conversions and learning about batteries and motors and things like that. And so I figured, okay, I'll give it a shot. All right. So at the time, the next thing I was trying to figure out, was what am I looking for? And at the time, I wanted something that was better than a Zero or a GPRS or something. So I was thinking 50 to 60 miles worth of range and freeway speeds. And freeway speeds, you could say 65 is freeway speed, but I'm thinking probably not. So I was hoping for like 70, 75. right? Like that's where you can feel safe and feel where you're getting out of the way. Let me back up for one step. I had not ridden motorcycles before, so I was like, okay, I'll build it so that I could do this. I don't necessarily know if I'm gonna, but I figure I'll give it a shot. Okay, next one. So what ended up happening was the buy versus build basically just became build because there weren't any bikes at the time that had the specs. To be perfectly honest, there really aren't any bikes now the motorcycles now that have the specs that are in production. Bramo has the M-Pulse, which they are coming out with, which supposedly should do it, and then there's the Roar Motorsports has their Supermoto something or other. That thing's really expensive though. Okay, whoa, what'd I do? So, when trying to think about what's going to happen, what I wanted. So if you could go forward too, the next one is kind of shouldn't have been there, but all right. So this is what in the end what I wanted to do. It's about 60 miles range, freeway speeds, 70 miles an hour or so. At the time, I didn't know how to weld, so I was thinking, okay, if I need to try and figure out how to do this where I don't have to weld anything. Because if you're going to put an electric motor in, and you're most likely going to have weld it to the frame, or else there's bad things will happen if you try to screw it in. And I wanted it to look good. If anybody was here when you gave your talk about a year and a half ago, maybe a year, about your EV, one of the things you talked about at the time that Jerry talked about was you wanted it to look good, not something that was 1965 whatever, and kind of have things hanging off the edge and hanging out and whatnot. I remember that specifically about your talk, and I kind of, at the time, I was thinking this, I was planning my build at the same time, and I was thinking the same thing. I wanted it to look kind of nice. I didn't want it to look like riding a bomb. Although, consequently, it's actually fun to ride it around when it looks like a bomb, because a lot of people come up and go, what the heck is that? So, with all the fairings on it, it looks really nice, but people don't tend to see it as an electric motorcycle as often, so sort of a pros and cons, I guess. All right, so I was just going to talk a little bit about what it is. So originally it was a 1985 Honda VF500 Interceptor. It was a little sport bike from the time. It was apparently very popular. I found it on Craigslist in October. This is what it looked like when I got it to my house. This is actually, it looks nice in this one. It really didn't look nearly as nice as this. There were parts that were falling off of it. It didn't turn over. The battery was dead. Brakes were bad, all sorts of fun stuff like that. All right, so let's go to the next one.
How much?
What's that?
How much did that cost? You remember?
I do. So the first question is, it cost $400 for the bike.
Wow.
It cost.
Well, it wasn't running. It makes it near worthless.
Yeah, right. It was near worthless. However, again, I hesitate to talk about this, about the cost of this. Partially because my father-in-law is here, and I have a 2-year-old daughter, and if he hears me wasting her college fund, I may catch a fair deal of crap about this. But I'll go for it anyway. So George, kind of cover your ears a little bit, would you? So it was $400 for the bike. When I got it, the guy told me that it hadn't been registered, so I had to get it registered at the DMV, and a couple of years of non-registration was more than the cost of the bike. And then one of the things I'll talk about a little bit is when you buy an old bike, you have to replace a lot of stuff. So I probably spent a lot more than that on it. And so in my lessons learned, I'm going to go into a whole bunch of lessons learned that I've sort of picked up in doing conversion. I'll talk about sort of the costing in a little bit. Okay, so first, I'm sure everybody's going to want to know specs. So Thunder Sky batteries, 60 amp hour Thunder Skies. 36 of them in series, about 118 volts nominal-ish, unless you riding it, and then it sags to like 110. I got them from, what was the name of that place? What was the name? Remember the name of the place that imploded about a year and a half ago? That was selling Thunder Skies for real cheap out of Washington?
Up in Washington. EV Components?
Yeah, EV Components. I was on the last shipment before they went totally belly up, thank goodness. The motor is an Intertrack hub motor. Part of the reason for choosing a hub motor was the no welding part. I was thinking, okay, I could build, if I get a hub motor, I don't have to weld a motor mount into the frame. It's a Kelly controller. It's a brushless motor. The guy who makes the motor, his name is Mark Gelbeen from Enertrack. He recommended this controller. So basically whatever he told me to do, I did for the most part. I ended up having to get it replaced because I thought it was broken. And I got it replaced with one that has CANBus. And I'll talk about that in a little bit too. The battery management system is a mini BMS from a guy named Dimitri something or other out of Florida. It's an analog BMS that does high voltage and low voltage cutoff. It has a main board that will, depending on how you wire it, it can put the throttle into oh crap mode, which is it runs it at half. It turns it down to about half, and it will turn the charger off once one of the batteries gets over its high voltage cutoff settings. What else? All right, charger. Oh, it's an Elcon charger. Who's the guy who talked last month? Mike. Yeah. He has one too. If you saw that it was mounted in his car, it's basically the same charger that he has. It's a 1500 watt charger. It runs off a 110. I had it spec'd out for lithium ion batteries when I got it. It is an Elcon, or effectively it's an Elcon. It's basically it's not badged as an Elcon, so that means I got it cheaper and from China. And if anything goes wrong, I need to get a new one. Anything goes wrong, I need to get a new one.
How long would it take to charge?
When I totally drain the batteries, it's about 8 hours. And the last hour, 2 hours or so, is it in CC or CV mode, where it's actually not drawing a whole lot of power. It takes a lot longer than I thought it would. So the pack is about 7 kilowatt hours, which is when I was talking about how I wanted to build something that was better than a zero or whatnot. So it's got about 30% more pack voltage, pack power than a zero or a GPRS.
Are you charging with 110?
I am charging with 110 right now.
That's why it takes so long.
It's 10 amps at 100 and whatever volts. So it should. If you do the math on it, it's about 6 hours, but for some reason it's 8. I'm not really quite sure why. Yeah, it must be. Right. So I'm sure that's got to be part of it.
So do you prefer 80% charge, or you don't believe in all that?
I don't have a way to make it do 80% charge unless I were to go out in the middle of the night and unplug it. So I just let it go. And the range isn't. And I'll talk about this in a little bit. It doesn't. The range isn't as good as I wanted it to be, so yes, I power it all the way up as much as I can. And then I'm a software guy. I'm not a hardware guy. I'm not an electrical engineer, so I honestly have no right doing this. So I figured, what the heck. But in any case, when I got the controller replaced and I got it with CANBus, I decided I spent $50 and got it with CANBus, so that I could use a little Arduino, a little microcontroller, and I can read the CAN bus off of it. So now I'm also a numbers guy, so now I have numbers out the wazoo, and it's great. It makes me very happy. So,
program for it.
What's that?
Right program for the numbers.
Yeah, I do. I have lots of them. GPS, it has GPS and all sorts of fun stuff like that. All right, so next one. Lessons learned about the donor bike. So if you're doing a conversion, presumably most of this applies to cars as well. Well, except for this first note. Sport motorcycles tend to have a lot of room underneath, as opposed to more of a relaxed chopper style or like a more Harley or a Honda Goldwings or things like that. They're where the seats are lower and there's not as much room underneath. So it means you can fit more stuff in the bike, which on a motorcycle is very important because there's no room for anything. And especially if you have things like a brushless motor where there's just more electronics to go with it, or if you want to set the one of the things I did was I wanted to make sure that it took some effort to actually get the motor engaged. So I have probably about 40% of the actual wiring that I have is to make sure that when you turn it on, you actually have to hit the run switch and turn the run switch on and then hit the start button, which would be the ignition on a motorcycle. I mean, you could just have it where you just turn the key and it was all functioning, but that seemed to me, I wanted to make sure that if somebody walked up and twisted the throttle on me, they didn't like make it go zipping off the stand. I mean, it's totally possible to happen because people don't realize when you're, especially on a motorcycle, and when the throttle is like right here, right? That if they walk up and you're kind of looking at it and it's not making any noise, that it's on. And if they twist it, the wheel will go and it will shoot off a stand and into the trees. Somebody actually did that to me. Thankfully, it was on the center stand, so the back wheel was up. And they walked up and went, "What? You know? Oh, great!" And went, and I was like, "Stop! Don't do that." So, in any case, there's a lot of wiring, and when it comes to a motorcycle, having that extra space is good. One of the things you'll see if you look is I don't have any room for the charger, so my charger is off board. I have to carry it in my backpack. Let's see.
A speaker with a little rumble sound in it. So
I left room. There's room. I haven't done it yet, but I have 2 FIAM horns. So I'm going to have a big horn, and then I have room for, with the little Arduino, I can stick some speakers on. I was thinking like the Jetsons car, like that would be cool, or like Flight of the Valkyries. I'm thinking that would be kind of neat too, like do a whole Apocalypse Now kind of thing. That would be kind of fun.
just a rumble sound that lets them know it's on so they don't pull the...
Yeah?
I was playing around, I was driving my bike over to Chapel Valley, and they asked me what my bike sound like, and I just said vroom, vroom.
Yeah, you go vroom vroom. That's good too. So more lessons. Craigslist has lots of good stuff, especially for donors, because people, especially in motorcycles, people tend to dump them and then want to get rid of them. They realize that they're not cut out for being on a motorcycle. They drop it and they want to get rid of it, or they're just motorcycles that people had bought a long time ago, like this one, and left it out in the yard for a long time. For motorcycles, and presumably for cars as well, you want to choose something kind of common. Not a really sort of obscure bike from a long time, especially if you're choosing something old, because finding parts can be really hard. I got lucky. This motorcycle that I picked, which I knew nothing about at the time, except for that it was just about the right size and was pretty cheap, ends up that it's a very popular bike, and there's a relatively large online community and a lot of parts on eBay from people trying to fix them up and stuff, which was pretty useful for me, because I replaced almost everything on it. Yeah, and I guess as far as cost goes, one of my other notes here is to say that when buying an old bike, think about how much you're going to spend in replacement parts, and I didn't realize that I was going to spend quite as much as I did. And then make sure you get a good repair manual with a color wiring diagram. Colored wiring diagrams are key.
So do you think it would be cheaper to buy a new one?
If you had the specs that I wanted, in particular the look good part, then yes. Okay. I actually think it probably would have been about break even. Like pretty close to about the same. You can get a new Ninja 250 or a CBR 250, the new Honda CBR 250 for about $5,000. Mm-hmm. And if you strip that and sell the motor off, because it's new, you probably make back as much as I paid for this, because I ended up having to do things like replace all 3 brake rotors, both master cylinders, the handlebar, the right handle throttle, just all sorts of different parts. All the plastics most of the plastics I bought from elsewhere, the fairings and things like that.
Well, and the time you save.
Yeah, time you save too. So these are things that you don't know when you're ignorant and you go into a project and this shouldn't be that bad. Awesome. Okay, what's next? Oh, so here's some pictures. Thank you. This is just talking about first things first. The first thing you have to do is take it apart, and this was just some things about taking, just some pictures about taking it apart. This is me ripping the engine out, and when the engine ended up out. This is what I was saying. It didn't look very good. This is actually more what it looked like when I got it. With wires and gas and all sorts of things hanging all over the place. All right, so next one. So lessons learned about taking apart these things. There have been a couple of who's done conversions here of things? You forget where things go. So as you're going along, it's really fun ripping stuff apart, unscrewing things and cutting them out and whatever, and I'll remember where this goes, I'll remember where this goes, and you forget.
All over
right? So it's amazing. There's actually a fair number of bolts that I'm pretty sure went somewhere that I can't remember. I have a whole bag full of them. So what's that?
Weight reduction.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, a lot of it you end up not needing, right? Because it comes out of things like the motor. When you take the engine out, there's all sorts of fun stuff that comes out with that. But so for me, the things I learned, which thankfully I did a lot, was take a lot of pictures of just random parts of the bike, and then or the car, or whatever, and then you go, oh, where did this go? Oh, I flip through your pictures. Oh, I kind of think that's what was going there. And just to be careful and be methodical about it. I was a little cavalier at points, and I paid for it by sitting in the garage at the wee hours of the night trying to figure out why something didn't fit back where it was supposed to. Okay, so go next. Where to put stuff. Once you get it ripped apart, you need to figure out what you're going to do. So things like, you got to figure out where you're going to put all the different things. Batteries, controllers, motor, all the electronics, throttle, things like that. There's two ways. There's two different paradigms that people talk about these days. They're both called CAD. One is computer-aided design. So if you flip to the next one, this was a CAD drawing I did of the batteries with the motor, with the frame, the recycle frame, and then I was working on batteries and trying to figure out how to get all 36 batteries jammed into this bike. 36 was kind of a lot, and there's not much room. So it was nice to be able to do this. Then go to the next one. And one more. And last one. Thank you. The other CAD is cardboard-aided design, which is just as useful. If you go to the next page. Which is making boxes and stuffing them in there and just seeing if things fit. This was very useful too, in a different way than the computer. This was a sort of peace of mind, as in the, oh my God, is this really going to fit? And thankfully it did. All right, so next, if you go to the next one, some things I learned about. Next page. Next things I learned just about where to place things. This, for me, actually, I didn't realize it would take as long as it did to really sort of sit around and think about where things would go and then try it out and realize it didn't work and go back. So it took me months of iterations of kind of putting things in and moving them around and taking the cardboard and moving them around and taking the components and moving them around and things like that. I guess for me, the lesson that I learned was that this process was much longer than I had expected. And the other things that I learned personally were not to get too married to an idea, because there are a lot of times where I was like, oh, I really want it to go here, or I want it to look like this or something, and it didn't work, and I would spend a lot of time trying to jam things in, and it didn't work, and then eventually I would just say, okay, I'm not going to do that, and then I'd pick some other idea, and it would work, and it would take like an hour, as opposed to the week that I had been trying to screw around with it to get it to work. So, don't worry about it when it doesn't work out quite the way you want it to. That was another thing. Okay, so electronics is the next one. This is just a picture of...
Next page.
Next page, please. This is just a picture of me setting up some of the electronics. And this was an interesting part, because this is where you start realizing that, oh my God, I could kill myself. So... the whole be careful thing. So this was what I thought it was, nice, a couple of wires hanging off of this. So if you go to the next one, this is what it ended up turning into, right? Which is when you actually get all the pieces you need. I guess another thing that I learned was, when you start, especially on a motorcycle, you think there's not much to it. There's a motor, there's a controller, there's a throttle, there's a contactor. Well, when you get right down to it, like I said, there's some extra 30 or 40% of my wiring, which is to make sure that it's a little safer, which ended up being nice. And then trying to jam it all in a thing that's about the size of a lunchbox and a half. There ended up being a little bit more, I don't know, messy. Yeah?
Did you say that part of it kind of goes right between your legs, Tim?
Yeah, go back one.
So is that where the gas tank is?
Yeah, that's the tank. This is the seat. And that is your crotch. Oh, wait, actually, sorry. So this is also the high power, right? So that's the 120 volts DC. So for what I wrote it around for a long time with it looking like a bomb, and I had the seat on and no fairings and a piece of cardboard right there. So, if you figure out what's the how much protection is that? What's the dielectric on cardboard? It's okay. I mean, okay. Yeah, I'm here. It seemed to work. Mainly that was just to protect things dropping on it. We were calling that the CCP, or the cardboard crotch protector. Okay, so a lesson learned about electronics. For me, as part of being methodical about things, one of the things I did do was that as the progression went from a very simple thing to more complex, I kept a wiring diagram at every step. So every time I changed something, I created a wiring diagram and I created copies of them and had them all. And that's, so I still have them all. So I could go back and see what the progression, why I made a decision to go from point A to point B, and sort of switch where I was put the, what order I was going to put the contactor versus the inertia switch versus the whatever. That was really useful for me because there were a couple times where I had to back it out, where I just made some bad decisions and then had to back it out and was able to go back and do things like that. The other thing for me was to as you're plugging, as you have these components, fuses, contactors, relays of various sorts and things like that, I ended up made a decision to make each one a separate connector that I could plug and unplug, and that was pretty useful. That ended up being a big win for me because I ended up tearing it all out way more times than I thought I would. So at first I had things like terminal strips where I was screwing wires in and stuff like that, and that can be a little sketchy if you're doing it, putting things in and out, because you can get them wrong and stuff like that. Okay, what's next? This is one thing is do a bench test. Make sure that all your parts work, because I got 6 months into the project and realized it was more than 6 months, that I hadn't actually tested it, and then I finally tested it and there was a problem with one of the components, so I had to go talk to somebody about, I bought this thing from you 6 months ago, can you, it doesn't work. And them saying like, well, why did it take you 6 months to get back to me about this? And I said, well, I didn't actually test it first. So this was a bit of a bench test. So here's a bit talking about fabrication. These are just some pictures of me. Cutting up the tank, making an electronic shelf, and then welding. I made this whole big thing about I didn't want to do any welding. Well, it turns out I decided I need to learn how to weld, and welding is a ton of fun. I totally dig it. I ended up welding together the whole battery frame, the whole battery mount frame, and welding parts onto the motorcycle to get it mounted well. I was originally going to try and use just the existing engine mounts, but they just didn't line up in the right places. They would have been right in the middle of the battery or something. So I ended up cutting pieces off, cutting the frame mounts off for the engine and welding on some new ones.
What is the shelf material?
What's that?
What is the shelf material?
Everything I did is aluminum, which this and the battery frame there, the motorcycle frame is steel. I went with aluminum because it was lighter. I did learn how to TIG. Actually, that's all I know how to do. I think it's fun. I would go and do it for fun if I could. The tech shop is like the greatest place in the world. I love the tech shop. It's like a spa, but with big tools. It's awesome. I totally dig it. Well, George, my father has a MIG welder, so for a while I had been like, I want to learn how to weld anyway. Well, okay, so I'll do it. Let's see. Okay, go to the next one. More lessons learned about fabrication. I talk about going to the tech shop and learning how to weld, and tech shop is great. They've got some fantastically awesome, massive tools, 4x8 foot CNC routers, Tormach 4-axis metal milling, CNC milling machines. The majority of the work that I did actually was done with a hand drill and a jigsaw. I used a drill press maybe 5 or 6 times on probably 10 holes maybe. Almost all the stuff that I did was with a hand drill and just a lot of patience and being kind of careful. Like you don't need massive amounts of tools to do a lot of the stuff. Obviously, the TIG welder is a big tool, but outside of that, I thought I would need more tools. That's not to say that I didn't buy some tools. That's always fun too. Yeah, and an angle grinder. Angle grinders are fun. Yeah. Aluminum is the choice to go with aluminum was kind of it was sort of double-edged sword. It's lighter, so it was good. It's very easy to work with a handheld tool with a jigsaw. You don't have to. It's not as hard to work with as steel, although you still can cut steel with a jigsaw. I ended up doing a bunch of that too. But it's a lot harder to work with when you're welding. It requires it doesn't necessarily require it, but it's best to do it with a TIG welder, and it takes some practice. I have a pile of a scrap aluminum and like molten oxidized like goo in my garage, which is all of my tests, a lot of my tests, and actually. Thankfully, I got the frame powder coated. There's the whole part of it looking nice, so you can't tell. There's a bunch of welds in there that are just garbage, but they're all painted, so you can't really tell now.
24 ST?
What's that?
What do you use? 61?
Yeah. It was almost all 6061 and some 6063 for parts where I just couldn't get it in 6061, which is I don't know. Eventually, it is.
What is that? Is that the rod or the stock?
The stock. Well, and then when you weld it, it becomes not 6061. So part of me not being a mechanical or an electrical engineer is that I didn't really know how well this thing would hold up. So it is probably completely overbuilt, which to me is fine. I would rather have it be overbuilt than underbuilt and having the batteries fall out on the road. I found a place. Interestingly, I found a place that does some heat treating, and for $80, I got it heat treated to 80% of 6061 just for the heck of it. I don't. To be perfectly honest, it probably didn't need it, but there was another one of those. Why not? Can't hurt, might help kind of things. So other lessons learned. The no welding part, like I said, was a laudable goal, and I actually know some people on the motorcyclist forums who've done a pretty good job with that, but I wasn't able to do it. It ended up not being realistic. Finding a good place to find metal. So Online Metals is a place you can get metal on the web. That's a lot of fun too. It's like Toys R Us, but for big kids.
You know about Allen Steel in Redwood City?
Yeah, I was doing mostly aluminum, and there's metal supermarkets, which is good, but they're actually just a lot more expensive. So
So I have a question.
Yeah.
If you had chosen steel instead, how much additional weight would you have put on the bike?
I don't know. I would probably guess. I mean, off the top of my head, it probably would have been another 40 or 50 pounds.
That much?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my battery frame is a lot of aluminum, and it's 13 pounds.
So triple that weight, 13 pounds.
Yeah.
Triple that would be the weight of steel. Roughly.
Another fabrication thing I learned is drilling and tapping screws is a really good way, if you're welding things, to keep them in place and not have to worry about clamping everything. So I ended up doing a lot of tapping hundreds of screws and screwing it all together and then welding it and pulling out the screws, which made it nice. Tips for welders. Let's see, what do we got next? All right, what's next one? So about a little bit more about the BMS. Like I mentioned, I'm a software guy, so it was fun for me to actually get back into something I know how to do. You don't really need, this is another one of those, you don't really need to do these things, right? But having a mini BMS, which is just all analog, it works great. It's a really good, relatively cheap alternative to, say, some of the more high-powered or super complex BMSs like the Elithion. How do you say that? Elithion, which is sort of supposed to be like the top of the top. Although apparently I was talking to a guy at Manzanita Micro who they do chargers, and he was saying that they stopped selling, or they're going to stop selling them because there's a ton of failure rate in those. So I guess there's just too much stuff in it, and it's not super reliable. I don't know. Have you heard much about that, Richard? Do you know anything about that?
We've been involved with it. We ended up developing our own DNS that we're starting to sell because it's a really big challenge to make a complex system for a low enough price that people want to buy.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of my sort of side projects is to figure out how to take my Arduino, and I wired in all of my batteries so I can do per cell voltage monitoring, but although I'm not using it right now. And if I can get that plugged in with an Arduino and a couple of picks in various different ways, I'm figuring I could pull that off and see if I can do it for cheaply. But I mean, there's a lot of that's a lot of you need to get it right. That's one of those you need to get it right kind of things.
You're shut off at high voltage and you're shut down at low voltage, but it doesn't balance batteries, right?
So the mini BMS, what it does is at high voltage it shunts first, so it'll do balancing over time over multiple charges. And the low voltage on the mini BMS, what it does is the way it works is that all of the cell monitors are wired in series, and then when it goes, so there's a closed circuit, and when any of them opens up, it either turns the charger off completely on the high side, and on the low side, when you're riding it, it opens up a relay, and the throttle is wired such that it goes through the BMS normally, and when it's open, it goes through a resistor. So it basically, depending on the resistor, it's about half throttle. That's not the greatest, because actually what ends up happening is it flaps, and that can be a little annoying. Although it's good enough. It's a good enough kind of you need to lay off. It's a good enough indication that you need to lay off, like things are getting bad. You should go home and charge it. You should stop soon. Although one time it started happening when I was about 4 miles away from home, and between 3 miles away from my house, and between 3 miles and there, it went from kind of beeping every now and again to just being solidly beeping as I was riding on the road. I was like, please don't kill the batteries. Okay, we can skip this next one. All right, so I'm just going to talk about some of the goals. All right, next one. Yeah. So the goals I had. This one isn't supposed to be. Yeah, just keep going. All right, that's it. So there's just a quick reminder: 50 miles, 70 miles an hour, no welding, and looking good. All right, so I was going to talk about each of these sort of in turn. 50 miles. I'm not really sure. I've gotten it to about 42, but I'm a little too chicken to push it a whole lot right now, because I'm still been trying to test some other things out. So it's actually only been running, and it's only been running for about 2 months, and it's had all the fairings have been put back on specifically for today. So that happened this week.
Will the 42 go longer if you drive it slower?
Possibly. The big problem with the range and the acceleration on this bike is that it's a hub motor. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't want to say that the hub motor is bad. The big problem is that it's heavy, and it is overweight for the power of the motor. It's a 10 kilowatt motor with a 30 kilowatt peak, and that's okay. But the problem is, with no mechanical advantage in a hub motor, the acceleration off from a dead stop requires a ton of current. It requires a lot of current, which means it's slow to come off, it's slow to accelerate, and it uses a lot of power. And it heats up the motor. So one of the biggest problems I have now is, going back to the weight theme from before, is that the bike is heavy. It's about 480 pounds. The hub motor probably wants to be on a bike that's 375. So it's about 100 pounds more than it wants to be. It probably wants me to be about half as much as I weigh, too. And I've been working on that. Not super successful lately. So, I think overall it wants to be the whole thing about 550 pounds, and it's about 700 with me and the whole get up. So, what I've found is that when it gets to a certain point, it craters pretty quick. So I haven't been at a place where I could get it far enough and still be close enough to home to charge it. Also because I don't normally carry the charger with me. If I run out, I'm stuck. Because it's an off-board charger, because it doesn't fit in the bike. Also, Thunder Sky batteries. I picked Thunder Sky batteries 2 years ago. They were kind of the thing to use because they were cheap. They were the cheapest of the lithium irons. They were relatively good. Things like Headway. I don't know if you guys know about the Headway batteries, or A123s were completely unavailable. Headways were hard to get, and they were more expensive. The CALB, which became Sky Energy, was about the same price and similar performance, but these were a little bit cheaper. So I got them, and it was great. I spent a lot of money on them. It was a good sort of mental investment, because I dropped a bunch of money on batteries, and then I figured I was committed and I had to finish the project.
How much per kilowatt?
What's that?
How much?
So I got them from EV Components, and they were selling them. They were 60 amp hours, and they were $60 or $66 plus about 20 or 30% for cargo and shipping and customs and shipping, and shipping in the States and stuff like that. So I think it was 76 or 78 per cell. Divide that out by 60. They were way cheaper than anything else. And also EV components was a bunch of crooks. So they apparently were selling them ridiculously cheap somehow. You were or still are selling Thunder Skies, right? So you must know how much they're supposed to cost, and I have a feeling that was not right, which is part of the reason why they went under, and there were lawsuits left, right, and center when they imploded. They really did implode. It was pretty funny to watch because I had my batteries. I know people that were not super excited about that. So the Thunder Sky batteries, they sag a lot. They're not very good in terms of lithium iron or lithium ion batteries as they go these days. If I were to do it again, I would probably pick another set of batteries which would be a lot lighter, provide more power, and wouldn't sag so much. So I think part of the sag is actually one of the things that kills my range, is that when I'm riding it sags 10% or something, and then I start going into low voltage cutoff. But when you let up on them, they're fine. So it's we'll see.
You're better off paying twice for batteries.
Yeah, it's probably true, actually. So maybe if I do it again, or do another one, or do another thing, I'll be in touch with you, Richard.
Your application also requires you push them much harder than the 3C that they were.
What's that?
Your application requires that you push them much harder than the 3C that they were designed for.
Yeah, I think 30 kilowatt. In order to get 30 kilowatts, it's 4.5C. And I don't push them that hard. So I probably get close to 3C, but probably don't get that far over it. So because of the heat, mainly because of the heat issue. If it didn't heat up, I probably would. So that's a good point, though. All right, what's next? Top speed, 70 miles an hour. Not sure. I've gotten it up to about 65. Like I mentioned, I'm not a motorcycle guy. I'm certainly more comfortable on it now. I still won't venture onto a highway. I'm just not. I don't feel like I'm ready for that yet. So the places where I ride, I can't get it over 60. There's not enough space for me to find a place to get over 65 anyway. So I have a feeling it might get to 70 if it just would take, 30 or 45 seconds or something like that.
I'll test that for you after.
What's that? Let me look at the charge. Yeah, right. Like for people who are real riders, I'm sure there are plenty of people who could do this for me. So no welding on the frame. Next. No welding on the frame. That was one of the goals. That didn't happen, but I was pretty happy that I learned how to weld. That was fun. And looks good. I think it looks great. I like it. So. It looks a little old school. Like now that I know more about motorcycles, it definitely looks a little old school with a big fat square headlight, because a lot of the motorcycles now, they're much more sleek looking than they do now. But okay, so was it a success? That's the next slide. I think it was. And so there was just one more lessons I learned overall. There's really too many to list. I mean, I learned so much stuff. I think one of the things I learned is about getting help. There's a lot of people out there. DIY electric car, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, for those who've built them. Endless Sphere, which has a lot of good stuff about just general batteries and electronics and stuff like that, although they apparently almost imploded last week, and they somehow made it out. And then elmoto.net, if you're into motorcycles or electric motorcycles, that is definitely the place to be. There's a ton of people there who have ridiculously amounts of good information and are very happy to share it with you, even if you're an idiot like me when you start, and ask really dumb questions. People are very patient. Interestingly, some of these places, when you get a lot of technical people, if you're kind of dumb, like they'll really kick you in the nuts for it while they're helping you. But these guys are actually pretty nice, which is great. And to me that was useful. And then obviously you guys, the EAA. One of the things I forgot to mention in the beginning was when I was thinking about this was at the rally in 2009 when I had just become a member, and Steve Schmidt, you're not here today, was talking to me, and he was like, "Yeah, you should do it. It's great. No problem. Go ahead, do it." And so he was one of the people that I felt was able to help me sort of get going. Other things I learned: these things take a lot longer than I expected. Maybe my talk has too.
And more money.
What's that?
And more money.
And a whole lot more money, yeah. So I thought it would take about 6 months. It's been about 19. So
That's pretty good.
well, so another lesson learned: perhaps not the best time to start this project when your first child is 4 months old. I don't know, just so one of those 2020 hindsight things. Although, also in 2020 hindsight, thankfully, it just sort of surreptitiously or whatever, happiness is a detached garage. Where you can, at 4 in the morning, you can shut the door and run your angle grinder and not wake anybody up. There was many nights of grinding and drilling and all sorts of stuff in the middle of the night while mom and baby were fast asleep, thankfully.
Yeah. You should.
What's that?
What was your end total cost?
Hey, George, you got to go take a leak or something?
I think something much more important. You should wait until your child's about 6 or 7 years old. They've got nice small hands that'll get back into those spots that you can't get into.
Yeah.
And they'll do it.
So, okay. All right, here, open kimono time now, right? So, 400 for the bike, 500 to register it. I probably put 3,000 into the frame. New brakes, new rotors. Had to get, even after I fixed the brakes, I had to get the brakes rebuilt. I got it painted. That was kind of a lot. I got the frame powder coated because the frame was all rusted. New tires. There was a lot put into just stuff. If I had bought a new bike, it wouldn't have cost nearly as much. And then I think it was $3,600 for the batteries, $1,000 for the controller, and then I don't know, maybe a quarter, another half of all of that for random things that I bought that I didn't need, or just various switches and screws and relays and random wire, spending all sorts of time in Halted trying to find things for cheap, buying stuff on Amazon, spending lots of time on eBay buying switches and things. 7 trips to Online Metals for getting things that I thought would be the final set of metal and then turning them into molten aluminum, then trying again. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you know anything about the bike that just broke the speed record over.
Yeah, turn around. Look at him. Ask him. He did it.
He did it.
Speed record.
Speed record.
That's Richard.
Well, I'm just wondering, looking at all this technology that he's presented today, well, what went into making that bike? Went over 200.
A fair bit more than mine.
If you had to do it over again, would you have gone with the hub motor or a drive motor?
I don't know. Probably I would go with the hub motor. There's something that's nice about the hub motor. The elegance of just everything in one place is kind of cool. If I could have gotten it to be a lot lighter, like started with a smaller bike and had it lighter and gone with the more expensive batteries that were lighter, I might do it again. If I do another one and my wife doesn't slay me on the spot for talking about it, I would probably not do a hub motor just because I've done one, and I would probably want to do something with a real motor and a chain. It's actually, the hub motor at very low speeds is a lot noisier than a regular motor. So you kind of can't do the sneak up on people in the parking lot, which is probably actually a good thing in retrospect.
So do you get good performance on that motor?
I get okay performance. At 40 to 45, anything about between 40 and 60 miles an hour, it's fantastic. I love it. It's great. The acceleration from 40 to 50 to 60 is better than a car. But getting into that range is kind of painful. And in city traffic, because like I mentioned, I don't feel comfortable riding on the highway yet. Doing a lot of stop and go with the weight of the bike and me is killing it.
Does it handle hills?
Yeah, it can handle hills. I mean, I haven't taken it into the Santa Cruz Mountain or anything. Like I haven't gone up on Skyline or anything, but it handles pretty well. It's.
Well, that's what I meant by hills, actually.
Well, I don't know. You would probably do better on it than I would.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've got a bike with a hub motor, and it's starting to struggle on the driveways.
Is it 10 kilowatts?
No.
So.
Nor does it weigh.
Handling be too wonky with a front hub motor?
I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea. I know there was a concern about unsprung weight with a hub motor, but since I'm not racing it, it's fine. And actually, it handles really nicely because all of the batteries are the way I set it up are relatively low in the frame. the center of gravity is very much like it originally was. So,
Waterproof?
nope, not even close. The question was waterproof. No, if there's water, I won't go out. It's very exposed. There's plastics and Lexan and stuff on it, mainly just to protect from hands, but nothing for water.
How's the controller? Is this good for water or not?
You can get the controller to be water sealed, but I was never intending to have anything to do with water ever.
The hub motor is good for water?
The hub motor is fine for water. I actually asked him specifically because it gets hot. Unless you leave it submerged, it will basically evaporate off any liquid any moisture that gets in it. So if you're riding it and you go through a puddle, he said it's fine. It'll just be fine.
Just not salt water.
Yeah, just not salt water. And he even mentioned that if it does rust internally and it sticks, once you break it loose, it'd be fine anyway.
You mentioned about the motor getting hot. What's that all about?
So the problem is that it's a direct drive hub motor, so there's no mechanical advantage. What's that?
No gearing?
No gearing. At low RPM, it requires a lot of torque, and it requires a lot of current for that. Actually, I'm sure Richard could do a far better job of this, so you may want to ask him later.
The best thing about DC motors in general is they generate a lot more heat when they're delivering high torque at low speeds than an induction motor would.
And since it's heavy, the bike is heavy, and since I am heavy, and it makes it that it's overweight for the application, right? That's just the way it comes down to. I talked to the guy who made the motor. He just said, you built a heavy bike, and that's kind of it. There are other things I could try, like I'm going to put a shroud on it to try and get some air into it, which should help with some of the cooling. And if that doesn't work, I'll probably put a fan in it. He also makes a motor which can switch from a dual winding to a four winding. I forget how you say that, quad winding or whatever, on the fly. So that would actually make it that the
Two torque constants.
yeah, right. So it would get more torque from 0 to 20, and then you flip a switch, and then it would go into like it is now. And supposedly, with some of the tests that the original guy who made the motor has done, that's actually helped a lot for these applications. So, and it's in the motor. I don't know how that works. It's all magic to me.
There's just two windings and they're put in each series or parallel.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's a very good way to double the torque on a.
Yeah.
Without generating so much heat and using less power and not sagging the batteries.
You have to design the motor for the torque, and then essentially what you do is cut the torque in half and the back EMF in half, so that you can get the higher speed or higher.
Okay. Cool. You had a question back there?
What instrumentation did you put on your bike?
The Arduino that I have has a 4-line serial LCD screen. And so I have a whole bunch of data, and it's too much to look at when you're riding. Primarily, I look at the temperature and start sweating when I'm in stop-and-go traffic and it gets up to 125 C. It's set to cut out at 135, which is within the parameters of the motor, but it's getting close, and you just don't want to push it much more. But it was at 126 by the time I got here. I was 13 miles on surface streets from Mountain View. Yeah.
The tire size could also affect the acceleration.
Yes, if I go with a smaller tire size, the guy who when I bought it, he told me he thought this would be the right one. I may go to a slightly smaller, but there's not that much smaller I can get. It's an old bike and it's a small tire, so it's not like I can go super small or anything like that. Yeah.
Have you done any fun stuff with your software background on monitoring or?
Oh God, yes. Yeah, that's the fun. I'm totally geeking out on that. So I have it now where I can download. It has a GPS, so I have GPS data, power to motor side and battery side, motor side and battery side, voltage and current. I have all three phases on the three-phase wire to voltage and current on the three phases, and temperature, and I have and all sorts of stuff. So I wrote some code that I can get that up on Google Earth and map that all on Google Maps and Google Earth and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm a total geek. Yeah.
So what kind of performance, how many watts per mile?
Watt hours per mile. Let's see. So watt hours per mile, if when accelerating, it's a lot more than it should be. It's in the 200 to 250 range. When it's at steady state at 40 miles an hour, it's like 100 or so. I just got the Hall sensor hooked up, so I just got the battery side current this week, so I only have a little bit of data for that. And so it works out to about on average, I think it's like 4 to 5 miles per kilowatt hour. So it's actually not that much better than my Leaf. Oh well.
The fairing, once you finally get it under, is that affecting much in the way of temperature for the batteries and controller and stuff?
I haven't had any problems with temperature. I actually don't monitor the battery temperature or the controller temperature. Well, I do monitor the controller temperature. I look at it in retrospect. It's part of the log. And neither of those have ever been a problem. So, because I'm always worried about the motor. The motor is totally freaking out all the time. Okay, well, this was way longer than I expected. But thank you very much.